This program, while curated to help you improve your health, contains general advice and should not replace the individual advice of your medical practitioner.
Tell me, what is embodied awareness?
So embodiment is that feeling that you occupy your body, that you are here and you are present.
Tell me about joy.
It's really interesting because it's actually one of the designated symptoms of hypothyroidism is lacking in joy.
What's the health of people in the UK like generally?
There's a massive, massive sugar problem. I mean, it's massive.
In life, it's normal to have ups and downs. But what do we do when we get stuck? I've always been fascinated by the healing journey. Why do some people get better while others fail to make the shift? Welcome to the Expert Series, where you'll meet 25 of the world leaders in health and wellness, discussing their passions and what it takes to make your shift.
There's an electrical feeling in the room.
I had to be a mom. It was so important to me.
I've always been a pain in the butt, and I love that.
I knew that I wanted to help people.
I'm Katherine Maslen, and this is The Shift. Hi, I'm Katherine Maslen, naturopath, author, and host of The Shift. In the Expert Series, we share the insights, stories, and expertise of each of our amazing experts. You might have met them on season 1 of The Shift, where we took snippets of these conversations and put them together into the series. If you haven't listened to season 1 yet, I'd recommend going back and listening to episode 1 on what it takes to make a shift in your gut health. We'll provide a link in the show notes. In this episode, we have award-winning UK nutritionist and yogini, Charlotte Watts. Charlotte is the author of many books, including Good Mood Food, The De-Stress Effect, and Yoga Therapy for Digestive Health. Her approach to wellness is one of mindfulness meets nutrition, and her grounded and holistic approach to wellness is something that I really resonated with. You may have heard Charlotte talking emotional health in season 1 of The Shift, and you'll hear some of the deeper parts of these conversations here. Listen out for Charlotte sharing how she recovered from a nervous breakdown in her early 20s, what embodied awareness means, and how we can cultivate more joy in our lives. This is a juicy one, so let's get stuck right in.
So my name's Charlotte Watts. I am a nutritional therapist and yoga teacher and author, but I would see myself predominantly as a nutritional therapist and yoga teacher because that's really kind of the source of my writing.
So tell me, what is a nutritional therapist?
So that's the kind of specific term as someone who is qualified to impart nutritional knowledge, advice in a way that people can actually use it. So it's different to the term nutritionist in terms that that implies someone who is a nutritional scientist, but we are actually people who are kind of disseminators of it. You know, that term changes throughout the world. So, you know, I could, I guess, call myself a naturopathic nutritionist.
So where were you born? Where are you from?
So I was born in Derby, which is a city kind of in the Midlands, North Midlands in England. We moved down south when I was, 7 or something, and for my parents to find work. And I grew up in Windsor, which is, yes, where the castle is, just outside London, which people not from the UK or, in fact, not from Windsor might think is a magical fairy tale place. It is not. I grew up on a kind of bog standard estate in Windsor. From there, then I went and did, I got a degree in printed textile design. Went back to Manchester because I wanted to go back up north. Then I came back down south again, lived on a boat for a bit, and eventually ended up in Brighton, which is kind of London by the sea in this country, which is wall-to-wall nutritional therapists and yoga teachers, I can tell you. It's one of those towns.
Sounds a little bit like the northern coast of New South Wales in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
What were you doing on the boat?
I was being pretty dysfunctional at that time, actually. I'd bought it off a boyfriend who went to Australia, and I was very keen for him to go. So I bought his boat off him. And I was working in a call centre in Uxbridge, which was quite nice in terms of camaraderie. But at the time, because I'd been very ill in my teens and I was very, I would say, lost physically, mentally unwell at that point. I was just kind of ricocheting around things and trying to survive, but I was also just in my early 20s, so I was kind of on a bit of a hedonistic streak, shall we say. So I had a good time, which was permeated by great bouts of depression and great dysfunction, but I do have some great stories to tell as well.
So you mentioned that you were like pretty ill in your teens. Tell me what that looked like. What was going on for you?
Well, it's hard to actually separate out whether it was, just teens or earlier. I've got very, very patchy, sketchy memories of childhood. But I do remember illness from a young age. So I had scarlet fever when I was about 8 or 9. I had scarlet fever, which I kind of, now looking back in retrospect, I do factor into the whole kind of chronic fatigue pattern. So I struggled quite emotionally. Home life wasn't that great. It's interesting because looking back now, I would say that I was definitely depressed, incredibly, demotivated, probably chronic fatigue. I was always a massive insomniac, had a lot of anxiety, panic, dark thoughts, racing thoughts, and I had very deep IBS that was from as young as I can remember. A lot of visceral pain was in there in terms of kind of body and psychic, mental, emotional pain as well. So it was, I just, the whole school thing to me was just, whoa.
What was the moment when you recognised that something was wrong with your health?
That's quite hard to pinpoint, actually. And I think mainly because part of the issue and part of the way that I was brought up, there was a lot of anger in my house, and there was very little, if any, I would say no discussion of emotional issues or needs or what was going on for anybody. Everyone was just angry at each other. It was like a kind of battleground. I kind of had this disconnect from that kind of judgment in a way, in terms of anything's wrong. Things certainly didn't feel right. But I didn't have, there was a disconnect with being able to say that was something, of disease or uneasy. The thing that I really knew was wrong was my digestive stuff, because that was really quite pronounced. I had constipation from, my first memory was kind of suppository gun when I was a child, face down on a sofa.
Is that your earliest childhood
memory? That's my earliest childhood memory, yeah. I can even remember the sofa. I was just so constipated in my child. I was very skinny. I looked awful. I looked shockingly skinny with a very, very distended, hard belly, which was always uncomfortable. And I really equate that now with not being able to kind of let go or process anything. So I was very stuck. There was no sense of awareness. There wasn't actually any language around health and the idea of health in those days anyway. So I'm 48, so this was, the 70s and the 80s. And there was not this language around this stuff then anyway. And it certainly wasn't, in my awareness. My mum was a nurse, but health wasn't discussed in terms of something that you had agency over.
Want to look deeper into your own health? Our virtual naturopathic team help people from all over the world to shift their health and their life. We offer a 90-minute online discovery and diagnostic session where you can find out where you're at, why you're here, and what you need to do about it. Everyone is so unique, and sometimes it can help to have someone break down your journey and see where it is that you need to head next. To find out more, go to theshiftclinic.com and click on Shift with Us.
So when did your healing journey start then? When did you start realising that, there was a better way to health and start looking after yourself?
I had a nervous breakdown at college I think it was about 23, 24. So it was just as I was about to graduate from university, I truly lost it. It had been kind of a long time coming in that I'd had such bad insomnia. I had barely got any sleep at all. So I was mentally a very, very frazzled place. Quite a lot of self-harming, agoraphobic. I could barely get myself to college. So it kind of snapped. But I have that achiever personality, which is very common for those with kind of developmental trauma, in that I was going to pass that thing anyway. So I got my degree through this. But there was that sudden understanding when I had this nervous breakdown that maybe, because I was very angry with the world and everyone, this understanding that maybe it wasn't everyone else that was wrong and had a problem. It wasn't then that I was seeing myself as wrong, but maybe that actually there was something in the way that I was seeing myself as part of the world that was fractured. So it was a big kind of rushing in, that moment of kind of like an implosion, if you like. And I also I was with a friend at college. We both, I lived in this house with 4 girls. We were all on the same art degree. We were all really dysfunctional. And no one slept. Everyone ate rubbish. One person just became a complete kleptomaniac. Everyone was just completely fractured. But there was one girl I was with at the time, and she had quite a similar thing with me, and she became a nurse after that. And she was told by a doctor that she had candida, which in those days, think about it, is quite, to be told, and that was like, I don't know, 1994 or something. That was quite a big deal in those days for the medical fraternity to say something like that, which is much more systemic, much more gut-rooted. So she started to change her diet accordingly, and I kind of went, oh, that's interesting. And it all kind of stemmed from there, that there was this potential to take some kind of responsibility, and the amazing revelation that what you put into your body actually had an effect on your emotional and physical health, which in this day and age sounds ridiculous that I only realised that at the age of 24. But in 1994, that wasn't what people were talking about. And in this country, in the UK, there was quite a revolution when this woman called Dr. Gillian McKeith had this programme out called You Are What You Eat. And seriously, no one really was taking that in on any great level before then. And I happened to live in Brighton. Well, I happened to move to Brighton after then, when there was lots of kind of yoga stuff around. So around, a similar time, I had a lot of very deep physical issues. So I had a lot of back pain, for instance, and I'd gone to the doctor who'd wanted to put me on beta blockers, and I was just like, no. I want to know why. Clearly there is something wrong. I am in a lot of physical pain. And I said, I want physiotherapy. And the physiotherapist just kind of went, you need to learn to re-walk. So that kind of set me on a journey of the yoga path as well, because soon within that, I kind of realised that I'd never actually lived in the present moment. I'd only been kind of catastrophizing about the past, or ruminating about the past, or terrified about the future, So the 2 things came together at once. Nutrition and yoga were part of a massive journey in my 20s. And I was really properly ill through my 20s. And I know that if I hadn't come to those things, I would definitely be in a mental institution. I've seen the paths of other people who come to see me, and I'm kind of like...
So what were some of the symptoms that you were getting?
Well, I had massive migraines. That was one of the things. To live in my head was really painful, very, very, very tight in the temples. I would fantasize about having trepanning. Do you know that medieval thing they used to do with you drill a hole in people's skulls? I was like, oh my God, bring it on. I want, I think it was probably quite a decent technique. But it was, the pressure in my head was awful. But also my ability, I'm a real hardcore introvert. I need to spend a lot of time away from people. It's not about shyness, confidence. It's very much about that neurological routing that you really need to be away from people to recover. And I have that in absolute spades if I'm in any kind of overwhelm. So overwhelm was a huge part of that. And I did a lot of work with a lot of people around this, a lot of hypnotherapy. I had my primitive reflexes shut down, which is a whole other interesting conversation about, neurological development. Loads of work on that. That made a huge difference.
Tell me how you got into yoga therapy.
It's a progression of what I do, actually, just in terms of it's seeing yoga as therapy is quite a kind of modern usage of the yoga model. So it really stems out of the fact that yoga in and of itself is not supposed to be curing something. It's not a path of pill for an ill. It's not, something's wrong, do this. It's very much about the recognition that we are whole and to bring us back to whole. And along the way, yoga was always a system of meditation. Along the way, asanas or postures, the physical practice was brought in as support towards meditation. And people along the way found out that actually did have health benefits. So it's quite a modern thing in terms of that it can be applied. And I came to it personally in this therapeutic way because I studied in kind of yoga for chronic fatigue, and eventually as I was doing a lot of study in my nutritional work for stress-related stuff, I was specialising kind of burnout and adrenal fatigue stuff. I was always really, really interested in where yoga and movement and awareness and embodied awareness really fit in with this. And yeah, it's all come together really through all of that understanding from personal exploration for myself and my clients and pulling in what I needed.
Tell me about the book then.
Yeah, it kind of just flowed. So yeah, it's called Yoga Therapy for Digestive Health. And it felt like everything coming together alongside the extra bits I wanted to learn to glue together all of the work that I'd already been doing. So I'd written a lot about the gut from a nutritional point of view. I'd written a lot about stress, trauma, burnout stuff. Particularly the trauma stuff, I really wanted to understand where that came in terms of the enteric nervous system, the second brain at the gut. And I really wanted to understand where movement came into this. I had this kind of fledgling understanding of fascia, and particularly visceral fascia around our connective tissue in and around the organs. And I had this kind of fledgling understanding of the way that things like osteopathy are going, particularly the work of people like Jean Barral and through visceral manipulation, that kind of thing, that actually a lot of our movement patterns aren't, the kind of old, the kind of classic anatomy stuff in terms of muscles and bone, but actually in this much more contemporary anatomy of fascially based, and loads of the movement stuff that expresses out through hips and shoulders is very visceral, very much organ related. And for years I've only been going to an osteopath that will also do visceral osteopathy, not just structural and cranial, but it has to be visceral as well.
So can you break this down for people a little bit further? Because if they're not used to the term like, fascia or visceral, like what does it actually mean?
So viscera are essentially our organs, often referring to our digestive and reproductive organs. So those are the ones kind of underneath our diaphragm in the bottom of our torso, our kind of main abdomen, if you like. So people often talk about visceral feelings, as viscera has a kind of like really kind of earthy, blood-like quality about it. So when we have a visceral feeling, it comes right deep from within us, and we really, really feel it deeply. Within this context, I did a lot of work with Judith Lassiter, who's a very well-known American yoga teacher as well, and I did some stuff with her about moving from the organs. And when you kind of put our viscera or organs into the context of yoga or any movement at all, it really helps to get an understanding that every movement we do moves out from the belly, or moves out from the periphery, the fingers, the head, up from the ground, back into the viscera, back into our center. So we see our organs and our viscera as the center of us. And when we feel like we're in the flow, when we're really integrated with our movement, then we're listening to that. We're listening to our belly and we're just moving from it. But often, if you kind of like, I don't know, say you go to I'm going to use the old term here, but disco, because I love it. And you're dancing and you don't feel you're quite there, and you're a little bit self-conscious, and you start thinking about how people might be looking at you. You're not fully integrated. But then if you get into the music and you really feel that in the belly, then you just dance. And that's the thing of really being in your kind of, your belly, you're grounded, your flow. And that's the stuff of really connecting down into your organs.
Tell me, what is embodied awareness?
So embodiment is that feeling that you occupy your body, that you are here and you are present. Within any kind of mindful practice, in order to become embodied, we would look to ground. And grounding is the process we do to allow ourselves to feel embodied. And grounding is anything that we do to give ourselves a real, palpable, literal, not in the way teenagers use it, but literal sense of where we are, the size and shape we are in the present moment. So that is, if you imagine your body, if you feel your hands and feet, that you can feel them, the size and shape they are, where they are in relation to your arms, your head, your feet, everything else. So to be embodied is to have that awareness. Now, we can never be completely embodied in the sense that you can't feel everything that's going on. And it's quite usual to feel absent in some parts of us, disconnected. You know, we make sense of the world by differentiating stuff, by breaking things apart. But the idea is in when we do things that are helping us to become more embodied, that we're integrating back again. So we have more and more chance of feeling ourselves as whole. But feeling whole isn't necessarily simply being able to feel everything absolutely all the time. It's really just having an acceptance that we're whole, and accepting that, you know, maybe today I'm just not feeling my feet that well, or my sense of grounding's a bit off, or, you know, it's why we do things like balance in yoga. It gives us information about, oh, look at me, I'm not particularly grounded today. But also, you know, we can't feel everything. If for instance, if you were able to feel your digestive processes, you'd go insane with the amount of information. So what we feel is often limited. If we're cut off from feeling in the body, and we tend to just be thinking our way through life and quite shut off, neck down, that's quite an unsafe feeling for the body. And it's how a lot of people live. They will just keep going even though they're exhausted, and they'll get to burnout point because they weren't listening to the signals of you're tired, you're doing exercise that's continually injuring you, you keep doing, pushing without the requisite recovery and rest. And if you keep going without listening underneath, the body's going to start talking back in the only way that it knows how, which is shouting, and that is pain. So embodiment is the root out of this disconnect. And we can do that through meditation, in a sense of really being present to how we feel and where we are. But we can also do it through moving practices that give us a real palpable sense of self. And a lot of people, if they're very disconnected or traumatic or traumatized, need to often do movement first before simply being with their internal environment.
How we feel colours our days. If we're emotional, anxious, low, or have low self-esteem, it severely impacts on our lives. In season 2 of The Shift, we'll explore our minds, the neurochemistry, the biology, the emotions, and the subconscious. You don't want to miss this, so be sure to subscribe so that you know when it drops.
The Shift!
So what's the role in yoga in embodiment?
Well, hopefully, and this is where the modern yoga world is in a little bit of array at the moment, disarray at the moment, is that actually, you know, modern yoga has become something very externalized. You know, at its absolute zenith, that would be, you know, doing, you know, what are often called virtuoso postures, something, you know, a very kind of external looking back arch, which is quite a kind of egomaniacal thing, when it is there to be seen as an externalized process, and say it's on a bikini in a beach, for instance. That is a long way away from an introspective, embodied practice. And actually what a lot of people need is the absolute opposite, which is to come into a fetal position and move inwards and really come into their heart and their belly and something very nurturing. So you can see those two as the opposite ends of the spectrum. It just doesn't make as good photographs.
Let's talk about that a little bit more, because we live in this Instagram culture where everything is beautiful and everybody is good looking and everybody can do perfect poses and eats perfectly beautiful food. And this is where like what I want to have a conversation about is, what is yoga at its core, and is that yoga?
No. There is a picture of a woman meditating, which is so used. You may recognize it. She's in, I don't think she's wearing a bra. She's tan, she's lithe, she's beautiful. She's got a kind of wet light linen top on. She's kind of in front of a waterfall in a tropical environment. She has her chin pushed up. She has the most awful meditation posture. It really upsets me because she's really compressed at the base of her skull. But she's, it's used so much for meditation, and it is everything that is, problematic, because even in that image of meditating, which is, a totally internal process.
So what are the core values of yoga, not just as the exercise or the physical practice, but as a total?
So the first tenet is ahimsa, and working from what we call the yamas. So that's within the 8-limbed path of yoga. So that's the Ashtanga path. That is not Ashtanga Vinyasa, the school, as in the dynamic school of yoga. That comes from this particular work. That sets out in this 8-limb path, the first part of the 8-limb path are these yamas. So these almost like kind of codes of living, if you like, the philosophical codes of living. And the very first one is ahimsa, which means non-violence. And you can translate that, in many ways. There's, discussion on how that would be used in terms of scripture, in terms of towards self. But within asana, within yoga postures and yoga physical practice, the very simple act of not pushing in, not imposing your will upon your body, or being in any way punitive, punishing to the body, is for most people a life's work. Because we are within a culture that says do more, look better, and that we have these pictures of idealized yoga postures absolutely everywhere. And that if you can't do that posture, then somehow you're lacking. And I've heard conversations in yoga studios where, the staff at the reception will go, oh, don't worry, you'll get into that posture by the end of. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, whoa. If that is your, goal, aim, where are your goals? What are your goals in yoga? The goals in yoga are to let go of goals. That is, but philosophically, when you are coming with that as your overarching ideal, it's not over, it's a conditions of behavior. So there is aparigraha, which is non-grasping, which is very kind of similar to the non-striving used in, mindfulness, Buddhism, not grasping for things. And I mean, this stuff is really nuanced, subtle practice, but it's the practice, and it transforms your relationship with your body and your relationship with any of the physical practice once you start to get down to these curious, interesting questions. And all of this is really governed by, there are these things in yoga called samskaras, and we can equate those kind of in neuroscience to somatic markers, so things we lay down in our nervous system, in our history, our story, which are the conditioned habits that we lay down from childhood, or even people would say past lifetimes, or certainly the womb. But they're the things that we learn. If you look at this in terms of neuroscience, they're the things we learn before the age of 7, when we're laying down all of our strategies, our unconscious behaviors in survival strategies. So in yoga, these samskaras, stuff's really sophisticated. Our samskaras are the habits we go into. And at its essence, a physical practice can really help us to look at those habits. So if you really want to go into, the perfect warrior 2 with your, front leg at a right angle, how attached are you to doing that? Why? And if you're really attached to it, why? Why are you attached to that? Yeah. And are you going to classes that feed that? Are you in a culture that feeds that? Is that damaging to your knee? This is often the path people go through. In yoga, they will go through quite, in a younger age, they will go through quite a physical practice where they want to get into stuff. They might find that actually that's creating injury. And then they might be kind of forced to start to have a whole different look at what they're doing and go into a different practice. Now that's advancement. Not getting further in a back arch and finally, putting your foot over your head or whatever. In certain yoga schools and cultures, there are people in their 70s having, people having hip yoga teachers and experienced students having hip replacements because they've wanted to get into, lotus with your, the Padmasana with your legs completely crossed up in front of you, which I will never do. I don't have the hip setting for it. That's about bone in the pelvis. That's, you can wear your hip bones down to do that if you really want.
Tell me about joy and maybe the lack thereof in most people's lives. Like, what's the deal with that?
It's really interesting because it's actually one of the designated symptoms of hypothyroidism is lacking in joy, is to have a sense of kind of listlessness or what's the point. Now, that could also be really placed into, one of the many definitions of depression. But joy is connection. It's a sense of being that aliveness. And joy isn't just being really passionate. It's not about a kind of thing that, I definitely know that I had in my 20s where I was looking for really extreme experience. And then that would be highs and lows and then crashing afterwards. It's not that. It's not those highs. It is a sense of connection that actually has a deep contentment behind it. So in yoga, there's a word called santosha, which means contentment, and it's part of the yoga path. And that is contentment with where you are in this moment. And that's not putting up with rubbish. It's not acceptance of things that you shouldn't be putting up to. It has good boundaries around it. But it is connection. It's openness. And, it's the stuff that we might feel when we do go out into nature, when we often, people will really first get this connection maybe when they have children. But really, we need to get people finding the joy again. A lot of joy is found from the stuff that propagates survival of the species. So we get a little shot of happy from the stuff that keeps the species going. And evolution and survival are not predicated on health. We are not calibrated to want to be healthy. We are simply calibrated to keep the species going. And all of our drivers, our unconscious biological drivers are around that. So joy comes from the things that really make us feel cohesive with the species. And we're pack mammals, which means we're warm-blooded, which means we need the tribe to feel safe, which means that we evolved with a sense of cooperation, and we feel most joy when we're part of that.
How has bringing joy and contentment changed you? And can you think of a specific example of that, of how that's changed you or what you've experienced with that?
See, I had a bit of an issue in that I always laughed and always smiled. So it always looked like I was all right. And actually it's been a big part of my persona to always look like I was all right and not tell anyone that anything was wrong. It was my saving grace, I think, that I partly always could find certain joy in things. Like I've always been able to kind of look at a flower and go, wow, that's amazing, absolutely incredible. And I've always had that love of animals and connection and looking at clouds and a rainbow and that kind of stuff, which you actually see, if you sit on a train these days. I've sat on a train and seen a full double rainbow outside, gone, whoa, and looked down and everyone in the carriage is on their phone and not looking up. And I've actually tapped someone on the shoulder and gone, have you seen that? And they've kind of looked at it and gone, and looked down again. I'm like, no. So I could always have that. And I kind of feel that was my saving grace, not to go completely insane. Yeah, I always looked all right, which I think is quite interesting. And I'm a loner. And it's this thing of being a real introvert, is that actually I need to be around people quite a lot, but I'm so shut down that to be around people is exhausting for me. I've really, it's just the thing I still have to manage. But it was the route in. Laughter is definitely the route in terms of cohesion.
What's the health of people in the UK like generally?
If you go to, your average supermarket and you look at the statistics and you listen to the news and you read the kind of data, there's a massive, massive sugar problem. I mean, it's massive. And if you just, go to schools, it's really problematic. I mean, it's being talked about a lot at the moment.
Is there a sugar tax here?
It's just starting.
Yeah. What was the resistance around that?
Our rights to eat what we want when we want it. Jamie Oliver, have you heard of Jamie Oliver?
Of course.
Right, okay. It's hard to know how universal he is, but my God, he's done well. And I'm glad he's done
massive
well.
in Australia. He's probably the most well-known chef in Australia. Yep.
That's really good because, it doesn't matter what you really think of him as a person. I like him, but he's done massive amounts. He's been a crusader and he's had a lot of backlash. And he's just one of those people who doesn't really care about that. He just keeps going because he really believes in it. And in this country, he did TV programs about trying to get dietary availability and what kids were in schools, would have some better nutritional foundations and bring down sugar content and that kind of thing. And he had a backlash of parents pushing stuff through the railings at school for their kids because it's their right to give their kids sugar.
Whoa.
Yeah. But it's whatever the cultural norm is, isn't it? It's kind of, and sugar is addictive. It's an addictive substance, and I don't care who comes up against that. It's a beta endorphin rush, and people have withdrawal, binging, normalization with it. There's a problem.
I have one last question for you. If you could give a piece of advice to somebody that's trying to make a shift in their life, what would it be?
Step back. There's an awful lot of information and advice and things you should be doing out there, and it's quite easy to rush at something and be picked up by a system or a list of things to do. And I think actually, if you feel overwhelmed by something in life, you can step back and take yourself away from it and actually have a sense of where you are. Then when you move in towards something, you can really start to get that connection with what you need over what you want. That not fixing what you think is wrong, but, coming back to a sense of whole, which you always are.
This was such a deep and juicy conversation, and I know that everyone would have taken something from this. Let's revisit a few of the key concepts from this episode. Number 1. Embodied awareness is about feeling grounded, centered, and in touch with your body and what it needs. It isn't about the absence of discomfort, but rather being in tune with how your body is feeling and what it is trying to tell you so that you can take responsibility and action to set it right. Number 2. Yoga is an internal experience. It isn't about what you wear, how flexible you are, or how long you can hold a pose. It's about being embodied and aware of your own self and about finding your own edges. Unfortunately, with the rise in popularity of yoga, a lot of the principles of the practice have been forgotten, and yoga has been associated with appearance rather than self-awareness. Number 3. Orality is a link between the mouth and the belly. There is a soothing sensation when we put something in our mouth, which should then lead to satiety in the gut. What has happened to a lot of people is that they're not feeling it register at the gut level, so then we end up putting more and more things in our mouth, which leads to disrupted eating. Snacking when we're not hungry is a really good example of this. Learning is great, but doing is better. Here are 3 things you could change as a result of listening to this conversation. Number 1, listen to your body. Really take the time and space to sit with your body and feel what it is trying to tell you. Signs and symptoms are your body's language, telling you when something isn't right. See a practitioner that can help you with diagnosis and take action to begin to make the changes you need to shift. Number 2, consider adding a yoga practice into your life, but do it for you and work with where you're at rather than trying to live up to an unrealistic norm of what yoga should be. Find a studio or teacher that encompasses the traditional principles of yoga, including meditation and self-awareness. Hatha or yin yoga is a great place to start when it comes to working towards being more embodied. I know for me that when I'm practicing yoga regularly, I feel much more in tune with my body and much more centered. Number 3, dedicate 10 minutes a day to just be. This might be time for meditation or relaxation, or just sitting in nature, or perhaps even just having a cup of tea without reading, watching, or listening to anything. Just 10 minutes that you can be with yourself without the noise of the world disconnecting you from everything. This helps to create the space for you to really feel into what is going on for you, so that you can then decide what you really need. I hope that listening to this episode has helped you to shift your mindset around a few things and give you some inspiration for what to do next. If you loved this episode, please share it on social media and tag myself and Charlotte so that we can say hi. To learn more about Charlotte, visit charlottewattshealth.com. CharlotteWattets.com. That's CharlotteWatts health.com, where you can find her wonderful books and info about how to get in touch. In the next episode of the Expert Series, you'll hear from the wonderful Lee Holmes, a leading Australian health advocate, recipe creator and cookbook author with a down-to-earth approach to healthy eating that I know you'll simply love.
Coming up on The Shift.
Tell me about mindful eating. What does that mean?
Mindful eating is just drawing your attention and your awareness to the present moment and what you're eating.
What does life look like when the kitchen is the heart of the home?
It's buzzing. There's the ovens on. There's smells wafting around the room. There are people in the kitchen chatting or setting the table, and everyone's talking, and there's just a lot going on.
From working with thousands of patients, I know that learning doesn't always equate to doing. For some of you, I know that you'll listen and take action right away, but for others, you're going to need a little more help. That's why I've developed my Gut Shift program. Over 12 weeks, I'll take you through what you need to make a shift in your gut health step by step. It's based on the latest clinical research combined with the clinical experience from seeing thousands of patients. Registrations are now open. Go to theshiftclinic.com and click on Shift with Us.
The Shift!